In this video, I'll describe how to construct the LED modules using more advanced surface mount soldering techniques. When I say more advanced, I simply mean smaller, because what we're dealing with here are quite small components. This is a package, this IC, which controls the LED color, is in a TSSOP package, so the leads are quite a bit closer together than the one we dealt with in the SOIC package that was on the main board. These resistors are 603 chip resistors, so they're quite small. You can see them compared to the tip of my fine forceps here. And this is an RGB LED, which is, not terribly small. This one's the easiest component of these to solder. So if you've seen some of my other videos in this series, you note that I get a little shaky sometimes when I drink too much coffee. So I laid off the caffeine today, or at least took it easy, won't say none. And so probably you should do the same if you're going to do this. Now what I have here set up is I have this board under a dissecting scope, and I've got a camera looking at it. And I think a dissecting scope is a good tool to use for this, even if you're not filming it. I think most places at universities or colleges, people are going to have access to a dissecting scope, and you don't need a special one for electronics construction as long as you have a decent source of light. If not a dissecting scope, then you'll need a good pair of head-mounted magnifiers or something like that because of the smallness of these components. We'll begin by fluxing over the whole surface of the board. Just make sure we're going to have enough for everything. And the first thing I want to add, the first thing I want to solder on, is the LED controller chip. This is probably the hardest one to do without forming shorts, but I'll show you how to fix a short circuit if you encounter one. So you just want to, when this chip is placed, you want to make sure that its polarity indicator, pin 1 indicator, which is this dot here, is aligned with the little scoop in the silk screen. So those two have to be aligned with each other. So the first step is going to be adding a little solder to one of the pads, just as we did before. And we just want a little bit of solder on the pad there, just like that. Okay, now I'm going to take the chip and put it in place, and you want to try to get it centered on the pins in both dimensions. Up, down, and side to side. And then once you feel like you've got it well positioned, just sneak in there and melt that solder. Okay. So now I've got it tacked down. Ended up getting a little bit of solder on the second pad there, but that's fine. Now there's various ways you can do this. It's quite difficult to do it without forming a short circuit though. But again, those are easy to fix. One way to do it is to get a little bit of solder on the tip and then just let that crawl underneath, just like that. As you can see, I formed a little short circuit there. That'll be easy to fix. So to fix the short circuit, I'm just going to add a little bit of flux. I'm going to take my desoldering braid with a nice fresh pointed tip on it and just heat the solder through the braid. Now I've got it done. Okay, one of those joints is a little starved for solder. And there we go. So now do the other side. Again, I'm going to make sure there's enough flux on there. Another short there. Okay, just to fix that one real fast, same procedure. And you notice I'm never holding my iron on the chip very long, I'm just kind of pulsing heat onto it. Okay, that looks good. Okay, I've got the chip held to where the view of the back of the lead there is in focus. And you can see there's a little fillet of solder behind the lead. So that where it touches the board looks more like a foot. The next step is to solder the LED on. So here's the LED, and we can see it has a little polarity indicator in the corner, which matches with that white triangle that's on the silk screen. So we just want to put a little bit of solder on one of these pads. Then again, holding that centered as best we can. Just going to tack it down. Turn 9 degrees. Okay, now while I'm in this position, I'm going to go ahead and put a bead of solder on R1 and R2. Okay, that does it, and then a little bead of solder on R3. All right, now the resistors. Okay, next to add these 3 resistors. R1 is 130 ohms, and R2 and 3 are 82 ohms. So if I'm already in position to add R3. So I'm just going to pick up one of the 82 ohm resistors. Hold it in place there. Tack it down. Then resoldering the other side just to remelt it, make sure everything's wetted. And now I can turn and do R1 and R2. So here's R1. This again is 130 ohms. Got it tacked down, got a little bit of duff in there. And we can go ahead and tack down R2 as well, another 82 ohm resistor. Okay, that will finish out that one. Alright, so that's a completed LED module. The only thing remaining to do is, before we install it, is to turn it over and close the solder jumpers on the back. Right, so we have the I2C address of this LED controller is here, 11000 A1A0. So the A1 and A0 are variable. This is how you set them. You jump the center land to either 0 or 1 using a blob of solder. For the arm and femur, A1 is going to be jumped from center to 1, and A0 is going to be jumped from center to 0. For the torso, leg, and forearm, both will be jumped from the center to 1. And for the hand or foot, A1 is jumped to 0, and A0 is jumped to 1. You have to jump the center pad to something. You can't leave it floating or it won't work. So don't forget, before you install these, to make sure that you set the address by jumping those appropriate pads. So I'm going to set this one up to be either a hand or a foot. So I'm going to jump A1 to 0 and A0 to 1. I usually start by putting solder on both and then to keep adding more until it blobs together. And it's as simple as that. Okay, so now that one's set up to either be the LED module either for a hand or a foot.